My name is Thomas Ford, and this happened to me on November 3rd, 2023. I spent most of my life chasing success, building a solid career in the financial sector in New York. Numbers, statistics, and market fluctuations were all that mattered to me. Faith was never something I completely rejected, but I also never saw a reason to pay attention to it. My wife, Laura, always suggested that we start attending church with our daughter, Sophie, but I always found an excuse. Life was busy, work demanded too much, and in my mind everything had a logical explanation, until that night. I was coming home late after a meeting with a client, my mind filled with emails to answer and business waiting for my signature. The streets were almost empty, only the distant sound of streetlights flickering. In 1 second, I had my hands on the wheel, thinking about a company merger, and in the next second, everything disappeared. I don't remember losing control. I don't remember the impact. It all happened so fast, but somehow I was still conscious. It was as if I had been pulled out of time. At first I thought I was dreaming, but then I realized I wasn't anywhere. There was no light, no sound or sense of ground beneath my feet, just an eternal, overwhelming emptiness. But I wasn't alone. There was something, a presence so intense that every part of me knew I had no control over it. And then, before me, appeared Jesus. Not as I had imagined from childhood, with soft eyes and a well-trimmed beard like in the paintings, but he was real, undeniably real. His presence was overwhelming, not only because of his appearance, but because of the truth that emanated from him. His eyes, I still can't fully describe what I saw in them. It was as if there was a mixture of sadness, wisdom, and urgency. He looked at me and without hesitation said, "The time is almost up." And as those words left his mouth, everything around me changed. I was no longer in the emptiness. Now I was high in the sky, looking at the earth. At first, everything seemed normal. The cities, the oceans, the mountains, everything was there as it should be. But then something was wrong. The air felt heavy, as if the world was holding its breath. And before I could understand what was happening, it began. The ground shook violently, as if something deep and ancient had awoken. Cracks started to open across the earth, swallowing entire streets and buildings. Skyscrapers and monuments, everything that once seemed strong, collapsed into a sea of dust. I saw entire cities crumbling, their lights going out one by one. But that wasn't the end. Fire started to spread. I saw homes, stores, places where families gathered, being consumed by flames. The smoke rose so thick it swallowed the sky, turning it into an endless expanse of darkness. People ran, screaming, desperately searching for a safe place, but there was nowhere left to go. I heard sirens, alarms, but they were soon drowned out by the sounds of explosions. The world I knew, the world I trusted, was crumbling before my eyes. And then, as suddenly as it all began, the scene changed. I was no longer above the destruction, but in an underground, dark and stuffy environment. I was in a secret room, far from the chaos ravaging the surface. Around a long table sat the most powerful men in the world. I recognized them immediately: Vladimir Petrov, the president of Russia, Li Wei, the Chinese leader, and Kang Ju, the dictator of North Korea. But at the center of them all was someone I never imagined seeing in such a scenario: James Carter, the current president of the United States. Their faces were serious, their voices low. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could feel the tension in the air. They weren't trying to stop what was happening outside. No, they were planning something even more terrible. At first, everything seemed calm. The world remained the same. Bustling cities, cars on the streets, people going about their routines as if nothing was wrong. But then I saw it. The first vibrations began. The ground beneath started to shake violently, cracks opening like veins across the earth. Entire streets and buildings disintegrated. Skyscrapers swayed before collapsing into a sea of dust. Bridges, fragile as toothpicks, snapped in half. The destruction was fast, relentless. I could hear the screams of people trying to escape, but I knew nothing could save them. And for some reason, I knew that this was only the beginning. The scene changed again, and this time, I wasn't just observing the destruction. I was in the middle of it. Fire consumed entire cities. Thick smoke obscured the sky until there was no more light. I heard sirens blaring, explosions tearing through the air, and the desperation of people searching for shelter. But there was no shelter. There was nothing left. It was utter chaos. The world was disintegrating before my eyes, and I was at the center of it, completely powerless. It was then that the vision shifted again. Now I was in an underground location in a massive room with dim, dark lighting. A large table stood in the center, and around it I saw the same world leaders in silence, examining maps and documents with expressions of pure concentration. Their faces were impenetrable, as if they had already accepted that what was happening was inevitable. But then the strangest thing happened. I saw on the screen before them a large number of missiles being launched into the sky, cutting through the darkness with trails of fire. It was a moment of pure realization. The war had begun. In the blink of an eye, an American city was erased from the face of the earth, consumed by the explosion of a missile. The impact was so strong that the shockwaves destroyed everything in its path. Buildings, cars, everything disintegrated. People didn't have time to scream. In 1 second they were there, and in the next they were gone. More missiles followed, more explosions occurred. Moscow, Beijing, London, New York, no one was safe. The world was burning, and everything happened so quickly that I could barely process it. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, the earth reacted, as if the destruction of the war had awakened something deep and ancient in the planet. Volcanoes erupted simultaneously, spewing lava and ash that darkened the already threatening sky even more. The air became thick, filled with toxins that killed within hours. The ground split open into gigantic fissures, swallowing entire cities. The waters of the oceans rose and engulfed the coastlines, sweeping everything in their path. Fire spread everywhere, consuming what little remained of life, of hope. The earth was in a state of total disintegration, and I knew with frightening clarity that this wasn't just a natural disaster. It wasn't just the consequence of a war. It was something much bigger, something that had been prophesied, something beyond our understanding. Jesus was by my side, his immense presence as always. He looked at me with sorrow and said, "This is not a punishment, Thomas. This is a consequence." His words pierced my soul. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to believe that all of this was a nightmare. But there, before me, the world was disintegrating, and I knew that Jesus' words were the truth. What I was seeing was real. Everything had been set in motion a long time ago. The choices made, the lies planted, all of this had led to this moment. It was too late to turn back. What remained now was to face the outcome. Suddenly my vision changed once more. The chaos disappeared, and before me appeared a new city. But it wasn't just any city. It was rebuilt, but in a way I couldn't understand. There was no war, no fire, no destruction. The streets were clean, the buildings immaculate, and the people moved with almost mechanical precision. The first impression was peace, but I knew something was wrong, something artificial. The tranquility around me was too silent, lifeless, soulless. There were no laughs, no conversations, only an unsettling order. The people were lined up in long queues, their heads lowered, waiting for something. As I approached, I realized what was happening. A small device was being pressed against their foreheads and hands. As soon as the touch occurred, a faint glow appeared under their skin. It wasn't paint. It wasn't a scar. It was something deeper. Something I had heard of but never believed. The mark, the seal the scriptures mentioned, the mark of the beast. Now it was no longer a distant prophecy. It was real, and it was happening. I watched in horror as those who accepted the mark began to change. Slowly, their posture straightened, their movements became coordinated, almost robotic. But it was in their eyes that I saw the true transformation. The light had gone out in them. They were no longer the same people. They had lost something much greater than their freedom. They had lost their humanity. Those who refused to accept the mark were taken. Some crying, others in silence, not knowing what awaited them. But there was no doubt. For them, the future was even darker. My vision changed once more. Now I found myself in an immense room with thousands of people gathered. The atmosphere was charged with a strange energy, a mix of despair and devotion. In the center of the stage, illuminated by an intense light, stood a man. I recognized him immediately. It was the same being I had seen in the sky, but now he was before a crowd with a power I could never have imagined. His presence was overwhelming. His voice, soft and welcoming, made everyone around him bow in reverence. "The old world is gone," he declared, "but from its ashes we will build something new, something greater, together." The crowd erupted in applause, their voices merging into a deafening cry of worship. I turned to Jesus, my heart pounding, and asked, almost in whispers, "Is this the Antichrist?" He didn't answer, but his expression was serious, sad, as if he knew what was to come. Then time seemed to accelerate. I saw the world transform before my eyes. It wasn't a cure, it wasn't a true reconstruction, it was something different, it was control. The old system of governments and nations had vanished. There were no more wars, but not because there was peace. It was because there was no need for wars anymore. The world had surrendered, not to an army or a country, but to him. That man was in control now. He had the power, the trust, and the worship of the masses. And that was the most terrifying part. What scared me the most was the fact that people believed in him, trusted him. They saw in him the answer to their suffering, their salvation. But at the same time, they were blind to the truth. They didn't know what they had done. They didn't know they were placing their faith in a lie. As I watched the scene unfold, terror overtook me. The man, the false savior, looked to the sky, and a great light appeared, extending across the vastness of the firmament. It was brighter than the sun, but it didn't emit heat. The crowd, in ecstasy, knelt. Their tears ran, their voices trembled, all crying out, believing this was the divine manifestation, the arrival of their salvation. "My son," Jesus said, his voice full of pain, "this is not what it seems." I looked at the crowd and saw the true tragedy. They were blind, worshipping a figure who was not the true Savior, but the greatest deception. They believed the end of suffering had come, but they didn't know that, in that moment, they were being swallowed by a lie. Then, a voice resounded across the world. It was imposing, full of authority, but something in its presence seemed wrong. "My children," said the voice, "the time has come. The suffering is over." I looked at Jesus, my throat tight, and whispered, "It's him, isn't it?" He just closed his eyes and breathed deeply, his sadness immense. And then the figure descended from the sky. It shone brightly, but what struck me the most was the feeling that something was deeply wrong. The false Messiah was here, and he had deceived everyone with his appearance of light. People were falling to their knees before him, shouting, applauding, surrendering to his false promise of redemption. And in that moment, I understood. This was the greatest deception of all. As I watched the scene unfold, something caught my attention. Among the crowd that surrendered to the false Messiah, there was a small group of people. They did not kneel, they did not bow before the radiant figure. They stood firm, with a silent determination that contrasted with the blind worship around them. Their clothes were torn, their bodies marked by hardship, But what struck me the most were their eyes. There was something in them that the others had lost. The truth. They were resisting. They had rejected the mark. They had resisted the lie. The false Messiah looked at them, and his expression changed. There was sadness, frustration. "These," he said, "are those who rejected the new kingdom. They do not wish for peace. They seek only to divide and destroy." And the crowd, which had been applauding and singing, turned against those few who resisted. The hatred in their eyes was palpable. What had once been a cry of worship turned into cries of rage. The Antichrist raised his hand and with a gesture indicated the fate of those who refused to submit. The first to be taken was a woman. Her face was marked by hardship, but she remained calm, unafraid. When the executioner dragged her to the stage, she did not scream. She did not beg for her life. Instead, she closed her eyes and murmured something. A whisper, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a final breath of faith. The executioner raised his weapon, and I felt as if the world had stopped. I wanted to turn away, not see, but something inside me knew I had to see. And then, with a deep impact, she fell. The crowd erupted in applause. They were celebrating the death of someone who resisted the lie. She was a victim, and they saw her as a threat. I looked at Jesus, my heart broken, and asked, "Why are you showing me this?" He looked at me deeply, his eyes full of a pain I could never fully understand. "Because you need to remember," he said. "You need to warn others." Suddenly, everything around me collapsed. The sound of the crowd, the applause, the voice of the false Messiah, all of it shattered like breaking glass, and I found myself falling, floating in the void. The vision, the scenes of destruction, the people who resisted, the deaths of those who opposed control, all seemed to blend into a whirlwind of images and sounds. I was in freefall, as if I were being carried by a force beyond my comprehension. The weight of what I had witnessed crushed me, and my heart was filled with a sense of despair. I knew the end was near, but there was something deeper there. The pain of seeing those who had surrendered to the lie, the sadness of seeing those who resisted pay with their lives. In one final sigh, before everything disappeared, I heard Jesus' voice again. "You have a mission," he said. "You need to warn, before it's too late." And then, with a snap, I woke up. The monotonous sound of a monitor, the strong smell of alcohol and medicine. I was back. I was back in reality. My body ached as if it had been torn from an eternal journey. I looked around and saw my wife Emily sitting next to me, her eyes swollen from crying. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, my body weak. All I could do was look at her and feel the truth sinking in. Everything I had seen, everything I had lived, wasn't a dream. It was real, and I had to tell the world. But fear settled in my heart. I knew no one would believe me. The lie had spread for so long that the words of an ordinary man like me would be ignored. But still, I knew I couldn't stay silent. If you are watching this, if you've made it this far, it's because you have also been called. Do not ignore the signs. Do not wait until it is too late. Jesus is coming back, but the lie is spreading too. Stand firm, stay alert, and if you have not yet given your life to Christ, now is the time. The end may be closer than you think. What I lived through was not a dream, nor a distant vision. It was real. And what is to come is real too. Time is passing, and it is crucial that we all prepare. If you felt the weight of this message and believe it has a greater purpose, don't wait any longer. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and follow other stories like this. There is much more to be shared, and together we can strengthen ourselves in faith. Share this video with those you know need to hear it, because the truth needs to be spread. It doesn't matter where you are or what you've done, God is by your side, ready to embrace you. It's not too late to change the course of your life. Stand firm, stay alert, and trust in God's plan for you. He is calling. It's time to listen and respond.